PharmaVentures, experts in deals and alliances.
Hello, welcome to Pharma Television News Review here at the International Biofest Conference in Melbourne in 2016. On this show, I have Sue MacLeman, who is the CEO and Managing Director of a company or an organization called MTPConnect. Welcome.
Thank you very much.
Your organization is interesting because it plays a pivotal role in how Australia continues to develop its industry, particularly in the area of biopharmaceuticals, medical devices, and so forth. So, first question for you, Sue, really is what are the origins of your organisation, and what's its purpose?
Yeah, so the federal government about 12 months ago said, what does Australia need to be good in 50 years? What do we need to really focus on? And so they established 6 growth centres to really be the nexus of those industries to really drive competitiveness and productivity. And given that we've got an ageing population and we've got a lot of chronic health disease, obviously medical technology, pharmaceuticals and biotechnology was an important part of that. So they've set up a growth centre, the Medical Technology and Pharmaceutical Industry Innovation Growth Centre, and because that was all too long to say, they call it MTPConnect.
And so obviously this is a strategic intent of this organisation, setting out to protect those areas and also to grow those areas and provide strategic input and also calls for action out of that for the industry. So where are you in that process? What are you thinking currently?
So the first deliverable for us was to come up with a sector strategy, a 10-year vision for the sector, really addressing the constraints and barriers for the sector and the sorts of activities that we needed to do to make sure as a whole that we were successful in the future. And so we actually consulted with the sector very broadly. We talked with almost 600 organisations or individuals over a very short period of time, including the CSIRO, really looking at future, looking really what are we going to need to be good at the future, not just what we need to be good at now. We identified that there was a problem with funding and investment. We identified there was a problem with skills. We don't have enough job-ready people coming into the industry, particularly in those jobs of the future. We knew that we had to get better at collaboration, and we knew that we needed to have a bit more focus on misaligned policy, and we needed some regulatory renewal. And so there's quite a lot that the sector identified, and then we said, okay, come up with your big, bold ideas. And so we put together the 10-year plan. We submitted that to government, so we're a not-for-profit standalone organisation who has an independent voice. So there's certain activities that we can do as part of that plan. There's also things the sector needs to do. And then we have an independent voice because we don't take paid membership. So we're not considered to be a lobby group by government, and it means that we can have very strategic discussions at all levels of government and that we get a seat at the table, if you like, as a technical expert in the space to actually guide some of that policy misalignment.
Okay. Big challenges. Some of them are familiar,
yes.
Which people have talked about over the years. I suppose, how do you implement that plan?
So a couple of things. On the funding and focus, we actually can influence that by reviewing all of the grant applications that get federal government money. So we now review all NH&MRC, ARC, CRC and CRCP grants, and we actually look at them from a value proposition perspective. Is there a commercial unmet medical need? Are they telling a positive story? Is there a commercial pull rather than just an academic push? So over time, that'll allow you to have products and services that are much more commercially attractive to the global supply chain. The second thing from our perspective is we actually have a seat at the table when we're talking about some of the investment programs that government is putting in place. So we've got the Biomedical Translation Fund, $500 million, $250 million coming from the federal government, $250 from the private sector. We have $20 billion in the MRFF fund, and a percentage of that will go to translation. So really making sure that all of those initiatives are aligned and they're actually behind the sector growth priorities and the knowledge priorities that we've identified means that we should actually get a good return on investment from that money.
Right, so you're acting as sort of like the review body
in that instance we are.
Within the framework of that 10-year plan.
One of many people that actually reviews those applications, but we look at it with a commercial lens, if you like.
Right, so your contributions at that level.
Yeah. Absolutely.
So, so how do you going through every grant is more or less an impossible task. So, and so forth. But I suppose in the end, how do you ensure that you overcome those two key areas. One is under funding, or not a sufficient amount of capital available for investment, and how do you overcome the issues of skill shortages in
skills
in
and
the
also
sector?
the need to collaborate, the better collaboration between business and research.
Right.
So we can put incentives in place. You get what you incentivise, and so we can make sure that you're incentivising the right things.
Right.
So that means that we need to put skills programs in place, and we announced this week through our project funds a number of training programs for the sector, where the bigger end of the sector is going to be helping the smaller. So one example of that is the Bridge program, where we got 14 pharmaceutical companies and their industry body together, and they're now going to be providing training for SMEs and researchers about product development and commercialisation. That's incredibly valuable, and in fact many of them will end up in the international offices of those pharmaceutical companies to actually get a better understanding of those roles in business.
Right. Okay. Well, that's an interesting initiative. So practical solutions to these
Very
particular,
practical.
Needs. Going back to funding, because government policy, government intervention, or what you want to call it, has always been an important factor. There are two drivers which put money into the market. One is the market itself, the market conditions and so forth, and the other is the government policy side of that. So from your perspective, looking at this issue of underfunding of the sector, which of those are more important, and how do you ensure that, going forward, that will year on year improve?
Yeah, so I think the first thing is there's 115 programs across both state and federal government that touch our sector. Many of them the sector doesn't know about, or they're misaligned, or they're the wrong incentives. So actually making sure that we get the right programs together that will drive the right things is important. So that's the influence that we can have on that government policy. In terms of the private sector, it's about educating investors further about the sector and its opportunities. We know innovation did not resonate very well. It was seen as entrepreneurial and also somewhat elitist, and so we need to get better at translating that science story as to why it matters to the common man, and the fact that it's the jobs and services of the future. And so I think there's two things for us to do there, both in the private and the public sector.
But I mean, one thing Australia has never been short of, in my view, stand for correction, is capital. It's a wealthy country, effectively. And in the end, what we're talking about is how much of that capital, what proportion, and it doesn't have to be a big proportion of it, is prepared to go in to take that risk in the biotech sector.
And that's very much about what the Biomedical Translation Fund was about. It's to really address those two valleys of death that those companies face, or those institutions face. And so I think that's going to be a huge initiative, $500 million going into the sector to address that absolute translation story. And we'll be watching that and monitoring its outcomes very carefully.
Indeed. So what can we expect then? I mean, obviously it's early days for your organisation. What can we expect over the next couple of years?
So we've put the 10-year plan together, and so we're saying here are the activities that we as a sector need to do to actually make sure that we're globally competitive. What does success look like? Well, we don't really need more money into the basic research, but it's about better money going into that translation, those clinical trials, manufacturing, and ultimately getting into that global supply chain for product development and commercialisation. Within our modelling, we have identified that if we're successful as a sector as a whole, 2025 we should have about 25,000 more jobs than the 48,000 jobs we currently have in the sector, and there should be at least another $2 billion in gross value add on top of the $4.4 billion we already have.
Excellent. Sue, thank you very much indeed for coming on the show.
It was great to talk. Thanks, Fintan.
PharmaVentures, experts in deals and alliances.